Well, thanks everyone for being here. I'd like to officially call the meeting to order. This is our Transformation Task Force, our second meeting here. Would like to thank SACOG for hosting us here. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate everyone's participation. Glad that we can actually all be here together in the room versus virtual. I think this will be a really good discussion as we move forward. So just a couple logistical things before we start. We'll go ahead and do a roll call of members and make sure that we have an official quorum, and then we'll get into our agenda as we move forward. So we'll go ahead and do the roll call. I'll start off. Komi Ajise. Rashidi Barnes.
Present.
Alex Bockelman.
Here.
Sharon Cooney.
Here.
Ian Griffiths.
Here.
Amy Hance.
Here.
James Lindsay.
Present.
Eli Littman.
Here.
Juan Matute.
Here.
Kate Miller.
Here.
Laurel Luna. Seamus Murphy.
Here.
Laurel Paget Seekins. Michael Pimentel. Robert Powers. Carl Sidoric. David Sforza. There we go. Tony Tavares.
Here.
Laura Tokoff.
Here.
Great. Michael Turner.
Here.
Carrie Watkins.
Here.
Mark Watts. Melissa White. And Jim Wenderman. Oh, then I'll just go back through. Carl Sidoric. Perfect. All right. Oh, and Michael Pimentel. Okay, perfect. All right, we have a quorum. I'll let everyone get settled in for a second here, and then we'll jump into our agenda. So for the second meeting, we're really excited to, again, have everyone here. Our first meeting was really to just get to know each other. I think for this meeting, we really want to set the stage for where we're headed ultimately. So today we're going to focus on our collective goals as a group. We really want to make sure that we are kind of thinking about what kind of transformation means in the context of this group. And we have a pretty packed agenda. This meeting is going to be 2 hours scheduled. We'll see kind of how we proceed forward there. Our future meetings are going to be a little meatier in terms of content. We've scheduled about 4 hours for those as we move forward. But we'll get into kind of the future agendas and the arc of how we want to operate as a group. But just as we get started today, wanted to talk a little bit about a couple logistical things that we also have. So we are standing up a technical working group. I think we had mentioned that in our meeting back in December. We will be sending out invitations for that shortly. We're still working on solidifying that group, but really that's a team that will be kind of helping support the work in between our meetings, helping to dive into some of the deeper issues to bring before this task force. So in terms of our agenda today, we really wanted to focus on some of our state goals and how transit fits into that. Really looking at some of our sustainability goals, and we have Darwin Musavi here from our team who will walk through some of that. We also have a couple case studies that we're going to be working through, really to show kind of not only here in California, kind of how transit has transformed itself and really helped to move forward past post pandemic, but also some of the case studies kind of around North America that we thought would be helpful to bring to this group as we set the stage for our future meetings. We're going to then close out by talking about how we will work together as we move forward. Talk a little bit again about that arc of where we're going. We'll talk about our upcoming meetings, the cadence of how we're going to work together, and then ultimately building towards that report for the legislature in October of 2025. So as we go through, I'd like all of our members to really save comment until after our presenters are completed. Our presentations are completed. We'll have a couple opportunities for fairly robust discussion. We do want to hear from you all. And then actually, as we conclude the meeting, we will kind of put out a little bit of a homework assignment for you all that we can talk about as we get towards the end. But really want to, kind of get your feedback to help build our agendas as we move forward, just to make sure that, this is going to be a meaningful discussion where we can, again, get all of your input as we move forward. Especially today when we only have, a 2-hour window to work with each other. So before we jump into the actual presentation, I believe we have a welcome video from our Transportation Secretary, Tokso Mashakin.
Good day. This is exciting. The first official getting down to business meeting of our Transit Transformation Task Force. Although I'm not able to join you in person today, do know I am passionate and heavily focused on the responsibilities of this task force. I'm so pleased to be working on critical transit matters with all of you, and I can't overstate the importance of what we are about to tackle. Your interest and participation in this group will contribute abundantly to all Californians. Each of you brings to the table your own unique experiences, essential knowledge, and input that over months and years will play out to improved quality of life for transit users across the state. So I thank you for your willingness in giving your energy and time to this effort. I have no doubt each of you has very busy lives and packed schedules. I can also translate that to say we have a lot of work to do. Some of it, no doubt, will be challenging, but ultimately, all of it will be rewarding. As we reviewed applications of the many leaders who wanted to be on this task force, there were many specific qualifications we were looking for. But there's one distinct quality that cannot be quantified. It's not in a box to check, but it's one that you all clearly have. And that is selflessness. Today, we kick off this important endeavor with this first in-person gathering of what will be a series of meetings convened up and down California through 2024 and 2025. Today's meeting will set the stage for the critical discussions to come in subsequent meetings. We will start by framing a key policy question. What outcomes does transit need to achieve by 2030 in order for California to achieve its ambitious climate goals? We will walk through the task force's key milestones, meeting topics, and operating model for the task force for the duration of this effort. We will also review case studies that are comparable to the current environment in California. Lastly, we will preview next steps and proposed dates and locations for the rest of the calendar year. Over the months and years, I will also be paying attention to how this work advances our core four of safety, equity, climate action, and economic prosperity. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge Undersecretary Mark Tellefson and Deputy Secretary Chad Edison and his team for their work to move this task force forward. Also, many thanks to our state legislature for passing the regulations to allow us to commence this important work, and to Governor Newsom for his vision and support of public transportation in California. Thank you again. Through this partnership, with your dedication and hard work, do know you're improving lives. Now, let's get started. Thank you again.
So I really appreciate those words from the secretary, this afternoon. I think one of the key things that I want to, leave with this group, and I think as you hear our secretary, go out and speak, at various different events, our core four is really, kind of critical for what we want to do, as a transportation agency and how we want to move forward as a state. So again, just reiterating, safety, equity, climate action, and economic prosperity. I think those are the themes that we should, keep in mind as we move forward. And really, all of those are extremely, critical, or I'd say that public transit is really critical to achieving all four of those goals. And I think that's one of the reasons why all of you are here and kind of where we want to, move forward. But with that being said, I do want to go ahead and welcome Christina Spence from SACOG. Again, thank you for hosting us today. Really appreciate that. I will turn the mic over to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you all coming. My name is Christina Svensk. I'm the Director of Transportation here at SACOG. We're super excited that this has come together and you all are tackling all of these issues that were just outlined earlier, and supporting just transit as a whole. It's something that we all know we've struggled with for years and years. And so this is somewhat long overdue, I think, in many ways. Like many of you in the room, the Sacramento region here struggles to balance the needs of our communities with the financial and oftentimes, unfortunately, political realities that surround the transportation environment. Here specifically at SACOG, we're working with our multiple local region and even statewide partners through many of the challenges that we're seeing. Finding ways to provide efficient and effective service in the post-pandemic world, we know is always exciting with all the new emerging transportation patterns that we're seeing that are very different than they were 5 years ago. Navigating zero emission transit requirements and what that means for things like emergency evacuation needs and resiliency. That's a big thing here with our rural partners. And integrating services and technologies and all of that. That's an ever evolving environment with different operators and different services coming online at any given time. And something that's very relevant here to SACOG, we're updating our MTP, our long range plan, and we're really trying to understand how transit can be a meaningful contributor to us meeting our greenhouse gas reduction targets and increasing the quality of life for our vulnerable communities that we have here. So we have embarked on some really exciting things that I just want to make you all aware of. We have a RAISE grant funded project we've just kicked off that is going to really outline our low carbon, low VMT strategies with a very equity centered focus on how we approach it. It's truly a community driven process and project, something we haven't really done here at the regional level. We're dedicating our carbon reduction funding that we have to implementation of those projects. And we're really trying to find ways to support longer term funding for those, many of which will be tied to transit projects. We also continue to implement and support our next generation transit strategies that we adopted by our board in 2021, like creating a regional transit network. How can we connect our 6 counties together with transit, something that again hasn't really been done either effectively or at all. And so we're very excited about that, but also creating an emergency preparedness committee to tackle some of the emergency response issues we have here with wildfire and flooding that we've seen in recent years. And then most recently, many of you may know, we just created a toll authority, the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority for managed lanes and toll facilities here. That is going to play a huge part in our implementation of a regional transit network moving forward. So we're very excited that you all coming together to talk about some of these issues and how things like that can move forward in the state, not just at our region, but at a state level. So really applaud this task force. Welcome to Sacramento if you haven't been here in a while. And we're just really pleased that you all are able to do this. So thank you very much. And it's great to see everyone. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Christina. Really appreciate that. I failed to mention at the top that we were going to actually take public comment after this particular item rather than taking public comment at the very end. So I would like to invite anyone from the public who would like to make any remarks. I would like to ask folks to limit their comments to about a minute per person, and then we will go ahead and move forward. So any public comment from folks in the room, or I know that we have a number of attendees online as well.
This isn't a public comment, but Kome Ajise, the task force member from executive director from SAG, is on the Teams call. So he's listening in, and he's been made a panelist, so he can also participate that way.
Okay, great.
And we have not received any public comments from either Teams or in the public.
Okay.
We do have one raised hand virtually. And so I will go ahead and unmute and I will let you know 10 seconds before a warning and just a reminder that you will have 1 minute.
Hi, thanks so much. My name is Jacob Wasserman. I'm a research program manager at the UCLA Institute of Transportation Studies. I just wanted to thank you all for the work you're doing and convening the task force. I'm really excited to see what you come up with, and I'm sure Juan will keep me updated. Just wanted to plug the importance of labor issues in your task force's work. We just released a report at UCLA on labor in public transit, how making better working conditions for transit operators leads to better service and ultimately better mobility for people who rely on transit. So I'm sure that's something you're going to cover. Just wanted to raise it for your consideration. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jacob. And if anybody else virtually would like to have a public comment, please feel free to raise your hand on the Zoom functionality.
All right, if no other public comment, we'll go ahead and move to our next agenda item. So appreciate everyone from the public who's joining us. Jacob, thank you for the comment. So I think we will go ahead and shift to speaking about the goals of the group here today. So really one of the things that I just wanted to kind of impress upon the group, and I know the secretary had mentioned this in his video remarks, is that we really selected this group for a reason. You all bring, particular skill sets, to the table here. All come from various different backgrounds, and just want to make sure that, we all, kind of have our day jobs, but, together as a group, we are really working as stewards, of the state here and trying to really think of transformational ideas that'll help move us forward. So I would, kind of on the screen here, you'll see, I'd like to ask the group to kind of act a little differently than you do kind of on a normal day. So really, as part of this is a transit transformational task force. So I really want to hone in again on that word, transformation. And we want you to be aspirational. I think what we'll do as we kind of start off through these, convenings is let's start big. Let's put everything on the table in terms of, kind of what a world-class, transit system looks like, in the state. How do we really, kind of think about different things to help achieve our environmental goals, which we'll, get to in a few other slides. So really, yeah, just, don't hold back. Just I think as we move forward, there may be things that we might not be able to do for various reasons, but at least let's start big with our thinking. I do want us to also think about being unconstrained. That's always, unusual for us as the state. Obviously, just, being realistic about the backdrop that we're facing in our budget right now, as all of you are aware of. We were, fortunate enough to have the $5.1 billion, and thank you to the governor and the legislature for doing that to kind of help sustain us as we move forward. But, let's, kind of think about, different things that we can do. Again, as we move into some of the funding discussions, moving forward, there might not be the ability to actually achieve what we all, kind of set forth here, but let's get all those ideas on the table. I'd also like us to make sure that, we are staying positive. I would like to have, robust, conversation amongst everyone. I think we are going to have differing opinions as to, where we go, different perspectives. But I would just encourage everyone to stay, kind of positive and, really treat everyone with respect. And then, we want to be equitable, right? That every idea or opinion is equally valuable to this discussion. I don't want folks to hold back. I don't want folks to feel uncomfortable, bringing ideas. There's no kind of silly ideas, here, with this group. And then I do want us to really be focused on the ideas and the topics of the particular, session. And, as we lay out, kind of the rest of the cadence of this group, we are going to have very kind of specific topics that we're going to address, as we move forward. So do want to just also encourage the group to kind of stay focused on the issues at hand, because there's a lot of, discussion that we could have but a lot of opportunities for us to get to those particular topics as we move forward. So yeah, just really, excited about the group that we have, excited to actually dive into some more of the content. And I just ask our team to maybe move over to our next slide, if we can. Perfect. Yeah, thanks. So I really, like this slide. It's interesting. So this shows a streetcar in Los Angeles in the 1930s, and really, I mean, as all of you as practitioners know, public transit was much more a part of the fabric of our communities. Before we really embarked as a nation on developing our interstate highway system, and I think our land use patterns of the last several decades, right? Dating back, even to, kind of the 1930s and 1950s, really has defined, kind of how our transit system, our transportation system exists today, as well as our transit system. So one of the things that, I mean, is, interesting here is, and I, kind of point to the quote at the bottom: in the 21st century, public transit can once again be the mode of choice by innovating within or with its existing assets to shape a sustainable and prosperous future, for California. And, part of our team here had an opportunity just this past year to actually travel to the Netherlands. And I won't kind of dive into, a lot of detail, with respect to comparisons of Europe to kind of how we're structured here in the United States and California. But one of the things that was really interesting to me through that conversation, going there, meeting with people, is just really how in the Netherlands, coming kind of post-war, they were really a car dependent country, car dependent nation. And they went through a transformation, and it did take time. Part of it was really that, the public recognized that, there were far too many deaths from people who were involved in, kind of vehicular accidents, vulnerable road users. And, it really kind of came to head, I believe it was in the 1970s, where a group of school children were unfortunately, killed by an errant vehicle. And that really started more of a kind of public outcry that, hey, we as a nation need to do things differently. So that really, kind of became embedded in their planning processes for how they planned their cities, how they planned for, active transportation, how they planned for multiple modes to interact with each other. And it's, really interesting where, today, in the Netherlands, I mean, they still are very, car dependent. I mean, they have pretty high, kind of vehicles per capita number, not in comparison to the United States, but overall pretty high. But all of their vehicular users also kind of recognize the importance of transit. They recognize the importance of active transportation, and that's something I think we can strive towards, as a state, and really taking some of those examples where I think we're at a moment where, again, not to say that, we need, some catastrophe to happen to help us, transform, but I think this is the opportunity where we know we have to do some things differently. And how can we use this moment to help, move us forward? So I really just want us to, kind of think about that as, we move forward as a group. And I do think that, there are some lessons learned of, how we can actually institute change. I mean, it is going to be hard, right? I mean, a lot of us are, kind of embedded in our ways. And I think we're at a point in time, now just in the transportation world where we really, kind of are dug in a way where, we have kind of traditional transportation on one side, kind of our, climate stakeholders on the other side. But how do we kind of bring that together? And I think, transit is one of those places where I think, we as a group collectively can coalesce around. So I really just want folks to kind of think about that, as we move forward, and we'll get into some more, kind of relevant examples, as we get into the case studies of how this has been done and how, again, we can, as practitioners, hopefully, move us forward in the state. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but I think this slide is, interesting as well, just with respect to how, we as a group, meet together. So, this is an opportunity for us to focus on change in that transformational aspect of transit across, California. So We had touched on, a lot of these points. We want us to be aspirational. Not necessarily just how do we achieve, pre-COVID ridership, but how do we go well beyond that? And I think that's what our group, really needs to focus on. How do we attract more customers? How do we become a mode of choice? How do we make transit ridership more competitive with a single occupancy, vehicle? How can, transit, in terms of kind of how we address this, how can transit ridership grow in my region each year? That's great, but how can we actually think about transit, where people are taking the majority of their trips in your region, via transit? Are there new ways, for us to work together to help drive this? In terms of the constraints, obviously there's a lot of constraints that we have to, kind of deal with as, as a group in our regular jobs. But how can we, can make some changes to really deliver for transit, but how can we collectively, work together as a state, as our agencies, local governments, folks that are in the educational space, how do we all kind of work towards that collective goal? And, really, I just want to refer back a bit to, SB 125 and the charge that outlined, for us. So, I think transformation is going to take, more than funding. I know there's a lot of accountability, built into SB 125. And, I think SB 125 is that signal that, as we think about transit in the state, it isn't going to be just about funding, right? It really is going to be, how do we transform our systems? And I think, it almost laid out that, we need to, earn our right, for more funding as a group. We need to think about, different ideas, to really, kind of fundamentally, rethink transit. So I just really want that to also be in the backdrop of our minds. It isn't a case where, if we need to, increase transit by, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, that's not just, okay, state, open up your checkbook. Okay, our local government partners, our regions, open up your checkbook. Yes, that is going to be a part of it, but we really want to have those ideas about how we, can, again, work together, how we can bring ideas here through this group and really, kind of think outside of our, silos that we're in and truly, work together, on this. So let's go ahead and go to our next slide. So I do want to just leave folks with this question. Not going to go around the group to ask this, but this is really what we're driving towards over the next, 18 months as we build towards that final report. What is it going to take to achieve transformative change in transit? So this is about, kind of reimagining and, where we go, as we move forward. And I just think that, this is going to take a lot more, again, than just funding. And this is the right group to bring all of these ideas, to the table. So let's just, keep this in mind as we spend, the next, 12 to 18 months, together. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this kind of outlines where we are. Sorry, I probably should have spent a little more time at the jump, walking through this in a little more detail, but we want to make sure that we can align on our goals and objectives. We are going to go through a review of our goals and statewide and what those imply for transit ridership. As I mentioned, we will get into some of those case studies, and then we'll talk about, our cadence and next steps. But with that, I did want to also, I failed to mention at the start, I did want to thank Highlands Consulting, who's here helping us facilitate. Thank you, Mike and team there, as well as McKinsey, who's helping us put together materials that will help us, really drive the technical working group, effort between these sessions. So did want to at least provide a shout out there. But as we move into our next portion of the agenda, I would like to go ahead and introduce Darwin Musabi, who many of you already know. He is our Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Housing Coordination here at the California State Transportation Agency. He focuses on initiatives related to vehicle miles traveled, housing and transportation coordination, climate resilience, and many other issues within the agency. But I would like to go ahead and turn the mic over to Darwin.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark, for the introduction. And it's great to be here today. Here's a bit of an echo. See if that helps. Yeah, really appreciate the ability to present to you all today on some of our climate goals and the framing around our climate goals and how that fits into the Transformation Task Force vision and purpose here. Going back to the fundamental question that Mark raised around what will it take to achieve transformative change, I think there are many goals driving what transformative change looks like in transit, but I think one of the fundamental ones, one of the statutory ones where transit plays a fundamental role is around our climate goals. You know, we have an ambitious 2022 CARB scoping plan that was released, next slide please, that was released in about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, that lays out some pretty significant goals as it relates to reducing vehicle miles traveled. And you know, we wanted to kind of frame that up and provide that as a backdrop for one of the driving pieces as to what we need to achieve collectively as a state and the role that transit plays in that, and really dive into, you know, what levels of scale are we talking about here when we're talking about transformation. So just to go over those goals briefly. So the scoping plan lays out a target for carbon neutrality by 2045. And as part of that target, it asks for significant reductions in vehicle miles traveled to meet carbon neutrality. We're projected to have a 25% reduction in VMT by 2030 based on 2019 levels, and then a 30% reduction of VMT by 2045 based on 2019 levels. When you look at that in terms of total kind of VMT reductions, we're talking about 25 miles per resident per day, going down to about 18.5 miles per resident per day for the 2030 targets, and then down to 17 miles per resident per day for this targets. I think what's striking about some of this is that a lot of the reduction is front loaded. So we need a lot of action relatively soon to try to meet these targets and goals. Next slide, please. In terms of getting there and how you get there, if we just think about the 30% reduction 2045 target for a minute and what it'll take to meet that target, we know that there are three kind of fundamental ways, if you think about a stable population, to reduce VMT. That's both from, those three ways would be shifts trips from single occupancy vehicles to other modes, reducing the number of trips per person, and then reducing the trip length. You know, I think there's various strategies that the state, regions, locals have been employing to tackle all three of these aspects. You could make an argument that this group has influence over all of them, but I think for the kind of illustrative purposes of the main part of the vision here, really thinking about mode shift, I think it's a central part of what we wanted to discuss. So we wanted to do a little bit of an exercise of, you know, what would it really take to see, you know, us meet our VMT goals, thinking about mode shift to transit, and what does that look like kind of at scale. And I think it's important to recognize, I guess, before we go to the next slide, that, you know, not all of our trips can be achieved by mode shift. You know, this is just for illustrative purposes to give us a sense of like, what would that look like at scale if we were to focus on that as a strategy. So next slide, please. So achieving VMT targets through that mode shift, this is based on some pretty rough back of the envelope calculations. This is not complicated analysis. It assumes a 30% reduction in VMT and then just translates that into trips based on average trip length, assuming the same amount of trip making, and assumes that those trips just get shifted to transit. And so we see basically a 10 to 15% per year transit ridership growth being needed, up to 10 billion transit trips per year to 2045 to meet that target. So that's an order of magnitude of a 5 to 10 time ridership increase of what we see today. So again, that, you know, I don't think this is necessarily you know, what the scoping plan envisions or what realistically is feasible given the various tools that we're using to get there, but it gives us a bit of a scale of the ceiling of what transit can really accomplish to help us meet our goals here. Next slide, please. Just to give us a sense of scale of our plans, we do already have ambitious plans, regional plans that set out significant increases of doubling, or in some cases tripling, of ridership by 2035. We are again with those VMT targets. We're talking about an even greater scale than our most ambitious plans here. If we were really serious about what is the ceiling of what transit can really provide to that goal. So this slide's interesting. I think this breaks down the kind of VMT shift to urban transit and zeroes in on what is the contribution of urban transit to VMT reduction, and if we were to really look at particular length of trips, like what do those contributions look like? So zeroing in on the types of trips that would be reasonably eligible for mode shift from urban transit, I think it starts looking more like a 4 to 6 times scale, really looking at those centerpieces of that slide. So cut out about a fourth of the trips and the really short trips, and then the long trips on the other end. You may have high-speed rail or inner-city rail be able to really tackle some of the high-end trips, but not our other transit services. And then those low-end trips, I think, are really best suited for first mile, last mile solutions that could tie into transit, but active transportation trips if we're talking about mode shift there. So I think this starts to illustrate, I think, a bit of a target place and a scale to really think about what does transformation look like at scale if we're trying to frame it around climate goals. I know Chad here will be diving into various examples of case studies kind of around North America as to what transformation could look like. But I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to this slide.
Yeah. Thank you, Darwin. Yeah. I would emphasize on this slide a bit how much of that travel is this kind of 10+ mile range in terms of VMT, and how about 27% of trips are in that kind of range where it's affecting 75% of our VMT. But that's on its own not enough, because if people are attracted to transit and rail for those kinds of travel, for those kinds of trips, they also need a system to go to their destinations on when they get to the station on the other end. And so this kind of interaction across the state of how we go after the medium and longer distance trips in order to shift some of those to transit and rail and intercity bus and other modes, and then have good systems on which those folks can depend on to get to their final destinations on the other end. This is going to continue to be an area of opportunity, and something that I think we can talk about as we talk about some of our strategies later in the meeting. Thank you, Darwin, for walking us through these slides up to now. I'm just going to spend a few minutes giving 3 different examples around the state of places where what this kind of change would look like. So these are geographically diverse. They're kind of smaller. They're smaller urban. They're large urban and smaller city around the state. If you we're going to be looking at the type of city, the different ending nodes. I'll just go to the next slide if you want to kind of start illustrating this with Eureka as our first example. So in this case, we have, sorry, this is Fresno, sorry. In the Fresno corridor, this is H Street from Old Town. Sorry, just 1 second. That quarter's mixed up in the wrong order here. This is Blackstone Avenue in Fresno, and Blackstone Avenue is a area where we have a very successful BRT line. This is Fresno here is in the 3rd decile of population density, has relatively low ridership. But in this corridor, current ridership is in the 5 to 10,000 range, And to get to the VMT goals in this part of the state, we would need to add about 30 or 40,000 trips to that transit corridor. That is relatively large growth, but it's also only about 10% of some of the trips, 10 to 15% of the trips in the corridor. And that is just one example of what it would look like in the context of Fresno. If we go on to the next slide, we're going to be looking here at LA. And this is Wilshire Boulevard between Santa Monica and Koreatown. And here in this context, the current transit services are already carrying 25 to 30,000 people a day. One of the interesting factors here is that as you look at the significant capital investment of the purple line, the metro here being added, that already contributes over 50,000 additional riders to the system and gets very close to that target of 75 to 80,000 trips a day. And so here's an example of a significant and expensive capital investment that is being funded, a lot of it with local funds and with FTA funds, and we're actually getting to some of the targets we need to get that kind of VMT shift. And then finally, we'll go up to Eureka in the H Street corridor. It's a corridor that is in the heart of Old Town Eureka. It's a small city in one of the most rural parts of the state. And here our transit is only in that 1 to 1,500 trips a day. That would have to grow very substantially in order to contribute. And I mean, this is kind of an example of, not every location is going to be equally able to make that kind of shift. And we want to recognize that as we go through our discussion today. So with those 3 quick examples, and there's a lot more, behind each of these that we could look at. They're really more for illustrative purposes. And I'd like to get into discussion and get us talking amongst ourselves here. The key question we want to ask here are, what are the challenges and constraints that we will need to investigate and address in order to achieve this higher level of ridership by 2045? If we're really going to go for achieving the climate goals, this is a chance for us to really put on the table both the challenges and constraints that we're facing, so that we make sure that as we do the work going forward, as the technical working group does work, as you all give us guidance on things that you want to make sure we cover as we're doing the report, we have these things in mind. And then later we will get to some of the strategies that we might be deploying that could help us grow in the near term. So let's go ahead and open this up. I will take you guys can raise your hand or otherwise chime in. Raise your name tag or something if you're ready to make a comment, and we'll call on you, and I would like to hear what you think are some of those key challenges and constraints.
Yeah, and thanks everyone. I actually just wanted to make one additional comment, and I really like the slide showing kind of the distribution of trips, and to Chad's point, where a lot of the bang for our buck in terms of VMT reductions can be made in those 10 plus mile, 10 to 50 plus mile trips. The challenge with that oftentimes is that each of our agencies is responsible for a much smaller kind of piece there, and I think this is also where we as a state kind of through some of our regional routes and some of the kind of broader thinking around rail and transit, we can kind of help facilitate some of that. But it is really going to be key that as we maybe make modifications to get people out of their vehicles to take those longer trips, that we do have those connections for those last mile connections and to get people ultimately to their destination. So I think that's something where, again, through our modeling, we do a fairly good job of that. But it is going to really require all of our agencies to work together to know truly, that a lot of these trips do cross jurisdictional lines, county lines, regional lines even. So that's just something that I wanted to kind of throw out there. And I do feel like that is one of the challenges and constraints that we have as we try to move forward. But did want to, as Chad mentioned, open it up to the group and really get, folks' thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I was going to make, I think, just to build on what you said, I think that is, thank you for sharing those numbers on just the how different trip lengths contribute differently to VMT. I was really struck by how, 50% of all VMT comes from trips that are 10 to 50 miles, and then a further 25% over 50 miles. So that's 75% of our VMT are trips that are more than 10 miles long. Thinking practically about a transit trip that's 10 or more miles long, it almost certainly involves using multiple, getting from A to B will involve a regional service and probably a local service in combination. I think about the 89-mile trip that I just took to get here today, 3 transit services. So it really gets at, to me, you cannot solve this VMT challenge without addressing integration between, systems within our regions, but also systems between our regions, between local and regional systems, and between, among regions. And I think this is a shift from how, when we characterize the problem in terms of trips, we often focus on existing transit trips and the role that transfers play in existing transit trips. I know in the Bay Area, only about 8% of Clipper transactions involve a transfer right now. And often we hear, oh, transfers aren't important because look how few people are making them. Well, I think that, again, to get where we need to go, this is really just highlighting transfers need to be a far more important part of how we plan transit going forward. So yeah, those are my comments.
Thank you. And that was for those on the, that was Ian Griffiths from the task force side.
Yeah, Eli Libman, Move LA. Yeah, thank you. Challenges and constraints. I think we need to take what I would like to call a global approach. We need a global perspective on this. And when I mean that, we have this real challenge about how we talk about public transportation. You think about the depiction of who rides the bus in Hollywood and movies and TV, it's the person who's lost their job and is down on their luck. We need to change that narrative. And that's going to take real leadership. It's going to take our elected officials, our politicians, our civic leaders, and others actually talking about transit in a different way, riding transit more regularly, and showing kind of leadership. We've even suggested an idea for an executive directive on this idea so that we can get leadership around it and communicate that. And I think that needs to shift the way that people think about their rides and the way that they view transit rather than I'm just going to get in my car. And then we need to look at the really local level. We did a ride along 2 days ago with a member of Congress, the CEO of Metro, and just a regular rider. He was a friend of ours, took 2 buses. And what did we talk about? When is the bus going to come? So frequency. Oh man, there's some construction and all of a sudden my bus is stuck and I'm not going to get to my destination on time. Reliability, and then the safety issue, both for the workforce. We talked a lot about that, James, and how do we protect our operators? And that's a big challenge, but just for the riders. And that has to include getting to your bus or train, waiting for your bus or train, and then actually riding it as well. And those are really big challenges that we're struggling with here in California.
Carrie Watkins, UC Davis. I think to add on to that, a lot of the research shows that habit is something that is going to be a big impediment. If you're raised driving an automobile, that's how you're going to continue to make your trips. It's hard enough to do this. If you look at people around this room, us talking about how we got here was a big topic of conversation, right? And I think these are people in this room who want transit to succeed. And yet several of us, drove or took an Uber or Lyft from the transit, the Amtrak station and things like that. And I think it's just a lack of awareness of the options that are out there. When I talk to people in LA, a trip I took to come down to a conference, people who are very sustainably minded thought it was crazy that I was taking buses around town. And they're like, this is LA, you're not up in the Bay Area anymore. This is not how we get around down here. People don't even realize how much has happened over the past 10 years or so in LA to really expand the system and make it so it's actually quite easy to get around sometimes, even faster than taking another mode might be. So I think thinking about those opportunities for the stick to go with the carrot in terms of discouraging automobile use But at the same time, thinking about one of those moments when people actually can change their behavior easily. So a move, some sort of lifestyle change. Those are the times when we think again about how it is that we get around, and interventions that go to those points in time are really huge in breaking habitual travel behavior.
Home, I think I see you have your hand raised virtually.
Am I allowed to speak now?
Yes.
Hi, can you all hear me?
We can all hear you, yes.
Oh, okay, good. Well, this is Comey, I just said with SCAG. I appreciate the premise of the question because I think it speaks to all of what we're trying to solve for. I feel like this is really what we're trying to solve for is how do we solve for the challenges and constraints. I think it goes to one of the fundamental issues with transit in our state, which is operation. So how do we pay for the operations? But the issue here is beyond just transit or the purview of the transit agencies, many of whom are sitting around the table, because it has to do with what incentives we have for driving and how that sort of distorts the choices that we have to make for mobility, to the extent that, parking is not part of the conversation. I think we miss out a big chunk of the opportunities to manage how people travel, where parking is very much wide open. You compete very much with transit. But also when you look at the infrastructure that's available to take care of what we call the short trips, that could be bike and pedestrian trips. When you don't have that infrastructure, people are most likely going to drive because transit may not be readily available across the various neighborhoods. So I think this is really I think the question is a little broad and probably requires us to break it down to some sub-elements. What can we do in transit? What do we need to do with infrastructure generally across municipalities? And how do we manage the externalities that encourage or overly favor driving over transit? So without question, I think transit agencies will need a lot more resources to be able to provide the capacity that we're talking about to take over those trips that I'm talking about. And somebody talked about the issue of integration. That again goes beyond just one transit agency, but across transit lines. So there is a lot layered in this question that I feel like it's the issue we're really trying to solve for here.
Thank you. Building on the prior speaker, this is Laura Tolkoff with Spur. I think the primary challenge with achieving is really achieving this kind of scale of growth by the timeframe of 2030. I think if we're going to take these numbers and these timeframes seriously, we do really need to look at the role of the state. So I think emphasizing the state part of the State Transit Transformation Task Force is really important. Really understanding what are the mechanisms that are going to allow us to make this kind of huge leap. Really investigating what is the state's role relative to transit in terms of resourcing and capacity and infrastructure development and operational capacity, as the prior speaker said. And I think, the reality is that we have really ambitious goals, but we don't have a solid and coherent and reinforcing body of policy that gets operationalized and attached to funding to be able to reach our carbon neutrality goals, to be able to get to Eureka, having everybody in the entire city taking a trip on transit every day, right? So that's the type of dramatic leap that we need to get to. And I think we really need to investigate state policies and supports for that.
So
increasing ridership 4 to 6 times seems like a daunting task, but let's just assume from a supply side, what that would need to happen. So you're probably talking about a tripling or quadrupling of vehicles and operation maintenance space in land constrained urban environments. You're with electrification, you're looking at more load at those places and more transmission constraints to bring in charging for the vehicles. And so when you're operating under those supply constraints, the efficiency by which you're serving the trips really starts to matter. Like when you look at a bus that's stuck in traffic, you can just say, okay, well, we're going to need 6 times the vehicles and operation maintenance facilities if we're going to be subjecting our high ridership buses to delay, lack of efficiency. And so we need to think about how to smooth the peaks so you don't need extra capacity vehicles, because land would be a constraint for a lot of this by moving to active transportation, and then really how to increase the efficiency of transit operations in the state through dedicated lanes. And that a lot of that is under local control now. The state land use policy has kind of changed the relationship between state and local control. But a lot of it is also under state control. It used to be illegal to turn right in front of a bus at a stop in California. It's no longer a vehicle code violation to do that. So it's important to think of all of those opportunities to improve the efficiency of serving this demand.
Yeah, I think to achieve the numbers you're talking about, you know, we all know I was asking like Gold Line in LA, how many people they take every day. I mean, that's the kind of thing you're looking for. But it's other things, peripheral things, workforce development. So how are we going to have enough people to drive? Our bus drivers are, you know, average of 55 years. That 55-year-olds aren't going to keep coming around and deciding to drive buses. We need to get more young people into the workforce, and to do it, we have to make it an attractive job. And that means giving them a livable wage that they can actually live in the community that they're serving. And then on top of that, you have to think of ways to house them and, you know, make sure that you're putting your bus maintenance facilities in locations where they can easily get to for their use, you know, to get to their job. Workforce development is one thing. Housing around transit, building to make that the mode of choice. That's a big thing. The ASIC grants is a good example of the melding of transit with the demands for affordable housing. And that's, you know, just a couple of the things, you know, making it so that you can have your workforce be safe out there. So, you know, the California Transit Association is sponsoring some bills to try to make it harder for people to assault drivers and things like that. So there's a lot of peripheral things that this task force will probably need to look at.
Yeah, Sharon, thank you for that. I mean, you just touched on about, you know, 20 of the different areas that we think we need, you know, expertise on and need to be working on as a task force. So I think that that's very helpful to kind of lay out those issues. Next, Carl Sidoric from MST.
Somebody speaking, we can't hear.
Excuse me, I think we lost the connection virtually. So if you're speaking into a microphone, please use somebody else's or lean in. We cannot hear anything virtually.
How's this? Is that better?
That's better. Yep.
Okay, so I started with safe, dependable, and frequency is proven to increase transit patronage. And we need a built environment that promotes that. We build currently more for single occupancy vehicles than we do for multiple occupancy vehicles like buses. Things like jump queue lanes, things like traffic signal prioritization, things like you know, priority lanes for buses. There needs to be more of that. And then, as Karen said, there need to be destinations built around these areas that are built for transit. You showed Eureka and Fresno there. How are you going to get transit ridership up in those areas? You need to have destinations around those corridors, places to live, places to go to work, places to go to school. If there's no there's no place to go. So we have to build environments that create those destinations around the transit lines. Thanks.
Laurel next, followed by Kate, and then we'll go to Michael Turner. Is that right? Okay.
All right, hi, Laurel Paget-Seekins with Public Advocates. I wanted to add, agreeing with what everyone else says, that there's a demographic component as well. And I appreciate the focus on climate, but I think we also should be drawing on the master plan for aging and other documents, thinking about the demographic shifts that are occurring, which maybe will help with our climate goals if there's more and more folks who shouldn't be driving due to not being, potentially not being safe, but their needs will need to be met for transportation still. And so how are we thinking about serving their needs? How are we thinking about paratransit in this conversation, and making sure that we're thinking about, the senior and disability riders as well?
Thank you, Kate and Alex, and then Michael.
I just wanted to reinforce this notion of pricing and things like paid parking in downtown corridors, or even cordon pricing. That would certainly encourage a lot of transit ridership. But there's also some barriers that we're dealing with now in particular, and that is just safety on our vehicles. And even it's, in some cases, it's perceived safety because we are social service agencies providing a lot of service to the unhoused, and that makes, unfortunately, some other people creates a barrier or a perceived safety consideration for people who might get on board the buses. So I feel like right now under the circumstances where ridership is so low and those people seem to be a lot more visible. I know this is a very uncomfortable conversation, but it does create a barrier for other people getting back on board the system. So I don't know, really, there's going to have to be a time where there's an equilibrium where the vehicles are not so empty or not filled with, I think that's the challenge. We need to get just people on board for other people to feel comfortable. So I don't know how you do. It's very much a catch-22 situation. So just wanted to point that out. But I do think that it's super easy to drive, and pricing it needs to be a component to get people out of their cars and using alternative modes.
Alex Bockelman, Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I definitely want to agree with a lot of the challenges and constraints that have been brought up. And I think maybe at the beginning you were admonishing us not to lean into this one, but I'm still going to lean into the fact that I think state leadership on, more transit operating funds is really important. I think it's really hard for each community to go to their voters and get more transit operating funds. And I think if you go the way that we've been doing it, if we do it that way, we really do leave out some communities, in particular those maybe that are more vulnerable, more equity priority communities. So if we really want a system that's going to feel like a network and we're going to have the kind of frequencies that we need, then I really think that the state leadership on having more transit operating funding is really important to that. And I think, I think a lot of what has been stated is it is really important for it to be a network. And that doesn't mean that we can't have lots of individual operators, but really having people experience it as a network. And I think in order to do that also, it's helpful to have money that isn't sort of individually under different political situations derived, because that sometimes doesn't help create as much of a network in terms of, I know in our region, we're really trying to look at, how do we have uniform signage and how do we have more fare integration and things so that when someone uses the system, they can really go from system to system if they need to and get to their destination. So Yeah, I just wanted to, even though we're not supposed to talk about more transit operating funding, it's really, really needed. I mean, when I loved the examples, but I had so many questions like, what are the headways, and how long are they stuck in traffic, and all of those things that we all think, in terms of, is someone really gonna be able to get on the system, and are they gonna choose to ride, so we can get to that 4 to 6 times growth. Thanks.
Michael?
Yeah, I just have, Michael from Turner from LA Metro. I just really have 2 points. One is, I think one of the keys here is, what do our customers want? That's sort of the cue or the clue to what will attract future riders. And it's very similar, what you hear in LA is very similar to what Carl's talking about in Monterey and what Kate will talk about in the Bay Area. It's safety, reliability, cleanliness, right? Those are the things that you'll hear across the state. But the second point really is, I think, how do we go about getting to those goals? And that's where I think the process becomes important, because it's going to be different in every part of the state. I mean, what will work in LA is not necessarily going to work in Fresno, and it's not necessarily going to work in the Bay Area or other parts of the state. And in large measure, a lot of what we do is funded by local sales taxes with local boards. And we have a very effective process with SCAG, where we build things bottoms up by the county. That's how we got to our sustainable community strategy. It's, similar to what everybody else in the state does. But the process, I think, for making those or addressing those issues really has to work with the local processes. So I think that is a key thing we need to keep our eye on.
That's great. Are there more comments here? We're going to do just a couple more little cases and then get to some like service strategies and things that we might want to do in the short term. And then we're going to give you an overview of the meeting structure that we have going forward, that we're recommending, the kind of way the technical working group is going to be utilized. And so that's kind of coming up, a preview of those attractions here. But if I can go ahead and go on to some case studies here, just to get us thinking a little bit further. These are, again, just to stimulate thinking. First, we're going to just go across the border to Canada and do some comparisons to Fresno and in the Bay Area. We have the Bay Area kind of contrasted with Vancouver, and Fresno with Winnipeg. The Bay Area and Vancouver are two metro areas with extensive transit infrastructure. And then the Winnipeg and Fresno are both bus-only transit infrastructure. So we'll go into them. We'll describe the similarities. We're going to highlight the broadly similar land use patterns and populations that these regions have. The Canadian cities have 2 to 6 times the ridership of their U.S. peers. And in the case of the Bay Area, this is done despite the Bay Area having much more heavy and regional rail mileage than Vancouver. In general, what you're going to see in the Canadian cities is higher frequencies and higher bus coverage. Some of the things we've been talking about now is necessary higher network integration, so you can really take a high frequency bus in the suburbs, and a strong focus on transit-oriented development. Looking at, go back one slide, please, to this visual. If you look at Vancouver and San Francisco, you have similar natural constraints surrounded by mountains and water. There's a broadly similar built environment with a dense core fanning out to lower density suburbs, both urban areas having similar average densities of 6,000 to 7,000 people per square mile. Going on to the next slide, why does Vancouver achieve more ridership and ridership intensity? There's a high frequency across modes. While they have less mileage of rail than San Francisco, they have much higher frequency on some of those rail systems, with automated systems allowing off-peak service at 5 minutes or better, sometimes 2 minutes in the peak. Buses, even ferries, often come every 15 minutes all day long. There's a strong network integration, as you're probably familiar. All of the services are integrated with buses feeding into the rail system, and they have a higher usage than in the Bay Area. And then finally, while they've had a great investment in the rail transit lines, they've also followed up with dense development, which we'll see on the next slide. Here we have two areas kind of zooming out from downtown Vancouver. The first is 9 miles out on the Expo line. This is called Metrotown and has a forest of towers that are being built along the new corridor created by the Expo line that runs east-west in that image. And then the second image is out at the end of the Millennium Line, or near the end, 20 miles out. You can see here the conscious mixed-use dense development to support ridership and make the most of the infrastructure investments that have been made there. So that's kind of a quick summary of some of the things that make the Vancouver system higher ridership. Again, this is about double the overall ridership per capita that we see in the Bay Area. Going on to Winnipeg and Fresno, both of these are small cities with small cores surrounded by low density communities that go out into agricultural land. There aren't a lot of natural barriers inhibiting development. They were developed after World War II in the automobile era, and they both have similar densities of about 5,000 per square mile. On the next slide, why has Winnipeg achieved more ridership than Fresno? These are basic reasons. There's obviously much more detail. In terms of coverage, they created a small busway that connects two key nodes downtown, and this has worked great to create an extensive frequent feeder and gridded bus network that allows you to get anywhere to anywhere in the city. They also have 6 times the vehicle revenue miles operated as Fresno does, and the commitment to that integrated network of secondary and primary bus routes. One thing here, I mean, they're about 6 times the frequency. They're similar in subsidy levels. So that's another factor here that despite having a lot more operations, their actual subsidy on the system is very similar to Fresno. The Winnipeg has basically achieved a similar ridership per capita to the Bay Area, despite not having any rail infrastructure. Finally, we'll go on to some California examples, and I think I think these are some signs of hope here in terms of like some of the things that our agencies have been doing that we really want to call out. Santa Cruz Metro is there at the top. They are in the process of reimagining their coverage and frequency with the goal of doubling ridership by the end of implementation to over 7 million rides per year on the system. They've already, between the fall of 2022 and December of 2023, realized a 30% increase in ridership through their focus on UC Santa Cruz and serving the university market. And that's a pretty significant kind of market-focused impact. San Diego MTS, through its Bus on Shoulder pilot project, established a bypass vehicle congestion during the peak commute. This is between downtown and Otay Mesa via National City. This is expected to bring in about 2.5 million additional customers over the 3 year each year for 3 years during their pilot program. And that's a really exciting additional market that's being developed that adds significant ridership to the system. And then finally, this is in San Francisco Muni, the first BRT line on Van Ness. I think many of you are familiar with it, how successful that's been. The ridership increase of 60% in under a year, really demonstrating the value of that transit priority, faster trips, frequent and reliable service, all the things we've been talking about here today. So I went through those quickly because I want to leave time for discussion, but this is just to stimulate our thinking. And the question I wanted to go to now for discussion is that given the diversity of California, what 1 or 2 elements of the transit experience would need to change to achieve 2 to 3 times more ridership in 5 to 10 years. And so these are kind of taking some of the ideas that are out there in terms of ways to, in the diversity of California, increase transit service based on some of the ideas you guys all have. So let me see who we want to start. Alex, you want to kick this one off?
We're unconstrained, right? We're just allowed to say anything comes to our mind. I like the idea of employers needing to buy transit passes for their employees, employers buying them for their employees. I think that's a good way to get a lot more people on transit fast passes.
Carrie?
To me, it's all about priority over automobiles. We talked about money. We have a ton of money in the state that is spent on transportation, but it's still being spent on things like widening I-80 between Davis and here in Sacramento, instead of improving the priority that vehicles are constantly given over transit. We have to be focused on how do we shift capital money to things like BRT, but not BRT alone, but it's every single intersection that the transit vehicle always has to be put first. We have to be thinking about how we make the travel times and the reliability as quick as we possibly can if we're going to get people to switch.
Eli?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about what Laurel said about demographics, and then also what Carrie was saying about habits. And on the demographics piece, you know, in LA, the population of people with disabilities is 15% and growing. And the older adult population is also growing. And at some point, every one of us will have some disability of some point, at some point. And so if we can think about that population and how we make this system much more accessible for everybody, and address, you know, we have a real crisis in funding, and we're going to keep talking about this for the access paratransit system. How do we address that? How do we make sure our system is more accessible? When you're thinking about habits and a point of inflection, as in age, there's real opportunity to think, oh, I need to rethink how I get around. And if the system is accessible, that becomes way more accessible for that aging population or people with disabilities. But I also think about age from the other perspective, because you brought up UC Santa Cruz. We have seen incredible gains in ridership in LA with our Go Pass program, over 30 million rides. Anytime I'm on the bus or train between 7:30 and 9 and 3 to 4, 25 to 50% of the riders are students. And again, they're at this point of inflection where, are you going to give them a bus pass or are you going to give them a driver's license? And if we can shift those folks, we can rapidly achieve that number. And then they become riders for life. And even if they do get a car, they know how to use the system and they're practiced on the system. So the more that we can invest rapidly, and we've seen, I mean, the shift is so rapid, right? You give them a bus pass, within 6 weeks, you're seeing already the ridership go way, way up. So that's where I'm like, that's where I'm sort of putting my head to. And then finally, the last demographic population that I kind of noticed from the examples, new immigrants, right? There's a real opportunity there. The Otay Mesa line, where is Otay Mesa? It's on the border. These are people that are shifting back and forth and may not necessarily have a car. And I think we really need to work on ensuring that the system works for them. In LA, when we were looking, we changed to fare capping, and they looked at how many people were paying cash, and it was 25% of total ridership. And those are folks who are unbanked, can't be banked, have credit problems, don't have enough money, or just don't trust the system. And so we really need to think about that population and how we can target them. Because again, if we're going to go for 2 to 3x, we need to go with these populations that are most likely to shift rapidly because they have that choice to make. And we really need to target and think about them as our audience.
Rashidi?
Rashidi Barnes, Tri-Delta Transit. The last two speakers really just took my thunder, but definitely priority is going to be key. You know, Carl can talk a lot about the hurdles that he had down in Monterey, not only dealing with, you know, CHP, but also just the state in itself, to be able to even get a BRT up and running within the last 5 years. And, you know, we see what Sharon has been able to do at MTS with their BR Bus on Shoulder program. But I know agencies like County Connection in Northern California, they've been working on bus on shoulder legislation for a very long time, which hasn't come to fruition. So bus priority or priority in itself is something that's very key. There's a lot of technology, of course, that we all know that's out there that can support this to help folks get on to the system and make our systems become more reliable, as we're saying. And then targeting those low income. We haven't really talked a lot about that. We know how many of our services, how many of our riders are low-income minorities. Targeting those groups through specific marketing campaigns, getting them on the system at an early age, and then continuing to support them as they move through the system and move on, I think would be key for us as well.
Thank you. I see both Carl and Michael want to speak. You guys choose which one's first. Okay, thanks.
Since Rashidi, hello? Since Rashidi mentioned my name and threw me under the single occupancy sport utility vehicle, because we don't say the other phrase, at least not at MST. You know, we recently did a service realignment we called the Better Bus Network. And we're talking about increasing ridership. And I just want to focus on our goal was who rides the bus is as important, if not more important, than how many are riding the bus. We had more ridership pre-COVID, but a lot of it was spent on campuses and on military bases, riding students and soldiers around in circles. We thought coming out of COVID that we wanted to focus our services more where the services are needed the most, where unemployment is the highest, where car ownership is the lowest. And we implemented a new system, increasing frequency to work areas, to schools, increasing frequency and service to those areas, cutting travel time on average over 30 minutes around Monterey County. And we had the first year 20% increase month over month over month. And now we're starting the second year, we're at 25%, 24% increase starting on that. So, but a lot of these people don't have cars. So I'm not sure how I'm impacting VMT because these folks weren't driving in the first place. It's a social mobility issue, but I'm not certain that I'm having an impact on what your goal is here. And I want to make certain that we don't leave people behind. And all of this by focusing on getting people out of their cars, because there's a lot of people who use our services that don't have cars and may never have cars. What's interesting to note, though, in our studies is that when we ask people about a day without transit, what would happen, 20% say they would not make the trip to work, to school, to medical appointments. So they are completely, which is devastating. But it was more interesting that over 60% would find a car, either through a family member, through a friend, through a neighbor, through a taxi, through an Uber, and that would add congestion, that would add VMT. So we really need to make certain that we focus on making sure that we have as much operating resources available to us, and anything that cuts into our operating is really creating more traffic, because people will find a way to get to school, to get to work, even if they're very low income and even if they don't have a car, they'll find a way to get there. So it's in our interests to make certain that we offer as much service on the street as we possibly can, because anything that cuts into that is having an adverse impact other ways. Thanks.
Carl, thank you. I was hoping you would bring up that survey, and I think it also points to the non-rider.
And we also do $2 for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Using your bank card, fare capping and all that stuff, that helps too. Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead, Michael.
Michael Pimentel with the California Transit Association. I think I want to echo the feedback from a number of task force members on transit priority, just recognizing that there is some low-hanging fruit there, and acknowledge that up until very recently, it was very difficult for a lot of agencies. That stipulate it's still very difficult for a lot of agencies to establish dedicated bus lanes in the state of California. Now we've worked with a few advocacy organizations around the table to help address some of those issues by way of CEQA exemptions. We've got to do more to streamline the delivery of those projects. And as Rashidi Barnes had acknowledged, things like Bus on Shoulder, it is fantastic. It's highlighted as a success. We've been asking for the authority for agencies statewide to authorize those types of projects for almost a decade. And so we need to move into a position of being able to build those types of projects to get people into high capacity transit. The other area that we've not touched on yet, that was mentioned briefly in an aside, is housing. And the reality that we need to do more to make housing affordable in our city centers. There's been some research out of UCITS that has explored why in the pre-pandemic era we saw decreases in ridership in the major urban areas. And one of the key drivers of decreases in ridership has been housing unaffordability. The fact that we are suburbanizing poverty, putting folks that were once high propensity transit riders into areas where transit is not rich, where it is not frequent or readily available. And we saddle them also with the added burden of housing and transportation costs, from forcing them to buy cars. And so we've got to address that. We also have the co-benefit there of, to Sharon's observation around our workforce, the fact that our city centers are not affordable creates a situation where we can't hire operators to be able to operate the buses. And so from the demand side, we need to address housing. From the supply side, we've got to address housing. And so those are some of the things I think we need to be focused on and kind of scope up beyond just conversations around the mechanical or policy grounds that we can fix public transit and think through kind of the more macro picture that we face here in the state.
Thank you. Let's go to Seamus and then Ian and then Laura.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with what's been said about frequency, priority, cleanliness, reliability. I think those are the things that our customers would say are the most important things for them. I don't think those are enough to achieve the goals that we started looking at with the mode shift that we're going to need to accomplish. I think that when we talk about what 2 or 3 things are going to improve the transit experience, we need to continue to think about improving the transit experience relative to the other option they have, the option to drive. And if we're really going to accomplish these goals, we need to think about some of those sticks that Carrie mentioned, think about the pricing of parking that Kate mentioned, and think about how to disincentivize driving as much as we're talking about incentivizing transit. We had great mode split in the Bay Area before the pandemic because driving was the inferior option. It took too long. BART, ferry service, Caltrain, those were the better option from a travel time perspective, not just a financial perspective. I think we need to make transit the financially superior option and make that very clear in a much more clear way than it is today. We need to hit them in their pocketbook and talk about tax incentives and be very clear about the subsidy that people take advantage of when it comes to parking and driving, and make them pay for that subsidy in a different way, and use that to disincentivize the driving experience at the same time that we're talking about incentivizing the transit experience. I don't think you can have one side of the conversation without the other. And clearly, I think the Vancouver ridership numbers are due to the 15-minute ferry headways that they have. That's got to be the case.
Thanks. I agree with many of what's been said so far, but first I want to just comment on the question though, because to answer this question, this is once again focusing on ridership or trips. To me, the simplest way of increasing ridership is to try to increase the number of short local trips that are occurring, that are a big portion of the transit trips that are already being made. Yet previously you indicated that to address the VMT goals, we need to be focusing, we need to make progress on all trips and of all lengths, but we really need to focus, the biggest impact we're going to have if we increase transit trips that are 10 or more miles long. So, I think to kind of more address how do we significantly increase ridership of longer trips, I think many of the things around safe, clean, reliable that's going to get us a lot of short local trips, but I'm not sure how much of an impact that's going to help us make on our major VMT goals. I think looking toward the trips that make a bigger difference in reducing VMT, network frequency, of course, both the combination of frequency and network connectivity is what can really deliver a significantly higher level of ridership. Having a 15-minute network at a regional scale, whereby across modes, across agencies, that if you look on a map, and there's certain lines, there's certain nodes that there's always going to be a bus or a train or some kind of vehicle that takes you there between the hours of 7 a.m. and midnight, Monday through Sunday. Having that freedom to know that if you're somewhere on that network, you're going to be able to get home. That requires so network planning combined with the operations dollars to run that core network at the levels that are needed, which really begs the question of roles and responsibilities. Who is defining what that network is? What is the role for defining what the regional network is? And then if we do have the luxury of having operations funding, how do we actually implement that comprehensively and cohesively where it's going to touch so many different operators? We're going to need to have comprehensive networks, not just at the agency scale, but really at the regional and even between region scale.
Thank you. Let's go Laura, David, Kate, and then James Lindsay.
Thanks, Chad. I want to echo the comments from Michael Pimentel about massively increasing transit-oriented communities so that we can massively increase demand for the numbers that we're talking about here. And then the second point I want to say is that, well, it's going to sound really biased towards urban areas, but in reality, I'm just looking at the sheer numbers that we're after here. California looks really different, as you've mentioned, but it's also true that the vast majority of our riders and transit trips are concentrated on just a few systems. So if we really want to see big shifts in statewide numbers really quickly, which we do, then we have to look at prioritizing improvements on our biggest systems as a core part of our strategy. I'm sure. And then the third and last is that, transit experience, I think we've learned the hard way in the Bay Area that when you design the systems for one type of user and one type of trip, you're extremely vulnerable. So I want to echo, what my colleagues have said here about making it really customer centered on a variety of trips for a variety of purposes for a variety of people.
Right. David Sporso with Assembly Transportation Committee. I really want to go back to the question, which one or two elements of the transit experience need to change. And based on what Chad showed in my own personal experience, those two things that need to change the most are frequency and dependability. I've been a lifelong transit rider. I've been riding transit for 20 years to get to work. And last week I got a parking pass to start driving to work. And I was embarrassed to do so, especially since I'm sitting on this task force. I bought a condo as a 10-minute walk from the light rail station. It time-wise takes me no longer to get to work on that light rail than it does to drive. The reason I stopped taking public transit is that train runs once every 15 minutes, which if I miss it by 1 minute, I am significantly later to work. And that train has dependability issues where if there's a power outage or cars are interfering with it in some certain way, the entire system comes to a standstill. So as I'm sitting in this meeting, I got an alert from that transit agency that there's a power outage and they've had to establish a bus bridge. When the bus bridge is established, I'm unaware where the bus actually picks up. And after 2 months of experiencing storms here, I was frustrated with the fact that I have a car. I can easily get in my car and pay to park down here. Why am I doing this to myself? And so if this whole goal is to not just ensure the transit experience for those who need it is dependable and reliable, the goal is to try to shift people that, like me, own a car, but by choice want to take transit because I'd much rather spend my morning reading for 20 minutes so I'm on the transit than frustratingly sitting in fixed 50 traffic. You need to make sure that that system is at least reliable, where I know when the train is going to show up. I know the train is going to show up. I know that if I miss it, I'm not going to have to wait 15, 20 minutes for the next one to show up. And we need to make sure that we're providing service that actually makes people want to take what is generally a better experience than sitting in traffic versus someone else giving you a ride and you being able to sit down and read a book or listen to whatever you want or talk to your coworkers and actually build a community versus the loneliness of driving a car.
Yeah, everybody's making great points. And I just kind of want to allude to something I think Carrie said earlier and something that always comes to mind because I did a TCRP study mission to Asia. And in Hong Kong, where the space on the street is so limited, they don't even want people, pedestrians and bikes there. They actually had this museum to sort of acculturate kids into this idea of how the transit's a normal part of the world that we live in. And it was a way for, to break down that barrier of, I don't know how to use transit. I don't know how to pay the fare. I think there's a lot of that prevent people from even trying transit the first time. And if we're talking about a 5 to 10 year period, maybe we start really talking to our children about this more frequently. I know we're talking to them about climate change, but as transit being a way to, reduce climate change and really have them contribute. And everybody probably here has transit ambassadors or something like that to help people learn how to take transit. But that's another element that we could expand so that there is that kind of, that barrier is removed. And it seems like a silly barrier, but even I have it I've been a transit rider my whole life. When I go to another city, it's like, well, how am I going to pay the transit, the fare? I don't have, and I never carry cash anymore. So it seems little, but maybe it could actually mean something bigger.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, James Lindsay with the Amalgamated Transit Union. I just want to touch on, I have no disagreement with what anybody has said this afternoon. I just want to touch on, Michael brought up about, being able to afford living close to the work locations. I represent most of the transit workers in the state of California. And I know at my locations at Santa Clara Transit, 50% of the workforce lives 2 hours from their work site. They just can't afford to live anywhere closer. And that is a major problem, especially when you have a 14-hour split in the day or a spread of 14 hours in the day to earn 8 or 9, maybe 10 hours of pay. So that is definitely an issue. I think that most of the operators here that are having problems with hiring operators, I would just tell you that seems to be the biggest problem that I've seen. 5 years ago, I would have told you just throw more money at it, but it's more of a work-life blend that seems to be the issue for individuals. I know Alex, she went there first, so funding is definitely going to be a problem. The cut in workforce development funding that's coming up is going to stop a lot of the workforce development training that we've been involved in with most of the transit operators in the state. We had a workshop about 3 weeks ago. We had 250 transit operators and management folks that were working on how to better relations, better training for workforce development for transit operator drivers. That program has trained thousands of hours in high schools, college students, trying to get them to see the advantage of being a bus driver. But if that goes away, we're going to lose all of that capabilities, and where are you going to replace all those 55-year-olds that Sharon was talking about? Because it is very difficult to convince younger folks that you need to be at a job for 14 hours a day to get 8 hours of pay or 9 hours of pay and live 2 hours away from your work site. we're gonna need infrastructure training, for these EV vehicles that are coming. That there's, every agency spends very little money on, training their workforce, as part of their budget. We're gonna have to make some kind of change there, or we're not gonna have people to work on the vehicles. So just my observations.
Thank you. We'll go Juan, Rashidi, and then Laurel, and then I don't know if we can figure out if we have enough time to keep going on this or take comments another way.
My name is Juan Matute with the UCLA Institute of Transportation Studies. I just wanted to mention changing how we pay for transit. It's one of the areas of the economy that we have a higher friction transaction for. There's lots of online checkout and other, even stores now where you can just walk in, walk out, that have been trying to reduce payment friction. Transit remains somewhat high. You have to get a special payment card with many systems. That is changing, but I think when we make every person in California, or most people in California, a potential transit user by virtue of what they already have on them, that can really help increase ridership. And TransLink in Vancouver went to open payments last year, and so that it does help.
Rashidi Barnes with Tri-Delta Transit, and I'm not going to belabor this point, but I just did a really quick search on my phone. Right now, to go from downtown San Francisco to Antioch, where I'm at, 46 miles, it's going to take 1 hour and 35 minutes by car, and it's 2:41 in the afternoon. So my point being there is that I don't see at this group or a part of this conversation the cities, the counties, who play a role in allowing for job centers to be to come up in certain areas. You know, right now in Eastern Contra Costa County, and I'll just use my small area as an example, everyone that travels out of Eastern Contra Costa County is either going to Oakland or San Francisco. So that's why traffic is the way it is, and vice versa. To James' point, the folks who are working in San Francisco, who are operators, they can't afford to live in the city. They have to drive from Antioch, 46 miles. So now you add another 1 hour and 35 minutes to their day. So that's almost so both ways. And now we're looking at, they've been on the road for 12 hours or 8 hours or whatever it is. So it's not an enticing job. And then we add these other barriers to it that makes it more difficult for people to even have a good life.
Hi, Laurel Moluna, RCTC. Everyone has already mentioned all of the main things, but just getting back to the question really quickly, I just wanted to touch on the transit customer experience again, because unfortunately, I have a 35-mile commute to the office. I can't take transit because there aren't enough options available to me. But, just getting back to the main 1 or 2 elements that really just come to mind is really just convenience. And I think in this time frame of like 5 to 10 years, I think of that more as like midterm, what can we do? And we all know that there's definitely a strong correlation between higher frequency and higher ridership. So there definitely needs to be higher frequency. But I think in many other things that I've learned and researched, there's also that social behavior factor that we need to consider, because people are willing to pay more for the service that they get. And short term, I think there's a lot of great incentives out there. Even in my county, we're offering free transit rides, free fares, and there's that. But long term, if the service isn't there, people are going to start dropping off. So I really like the idea that how, there's that generational focus where those now who are perhaps in high school, college, and they're getting that free ride and it's convenient for them, as they grow older, then hopefully they'll stick with transit because they realize that it is convenient, and hopefully that convenience is still there, because as they get older and they want to use it to commute to work or to school, or whatever the case might be, they'd be willing to pay for the fare of like $2 to $3 rather than getting back into their car, because that convenience has already stuck with them.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and appreciate all the discussion. I think this has been really helpful as we work to build our future agendas here. A lot of kind of the same themes that have come up from everyone, and I do think that some of the kind of frequency reliability issues are key, and I think to the point that Seamus brought up is trying to make sure that transit is competitive with those alternatives, and how do we go about doing that. I think it also is interesting in terms of kind of habits and what you're used to. I think just in our society today, we tend to, have very little, tolerance for like vehicular traffic, right? If you're waiting 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, everyone's, kind of in an uproar. Whereas, with our transit systems, if you only have to wait 15 minutes, that's a good day a lot of times, right? So it's just, kind of changing that perspective and how we think about our different modes of transportation and that convenience factor associated with it. So yeah, not a, kind of easy turnkey solutions, to get there. And I think that's really what we want to dive into as we get into the rest of our session. So I know I do want to keep us, relatively on time here. And I know that there also were, kind of a few people who I believe, had some, comments in the chat, and I do want to maybe just open it up to public comment at the very end, but I do want to, kind of walk through the agenda here as we move forward. So can we go to the next slide? So this is what we've mapped out at this point. Obviously subject to change a little bit, but really our first couple sessions have been more stage setting and thinking about kind of the current state of play, and then some of those changes that we just talked about. So I think as we get into our next session, which will be in San Diego, so we'll send all these materials out to everyone after, so you have this. But I think we really want to dive deeper into everything that we heard today, drill into those issues about what are those changes that we need to make, and how do we go about doing it. Then getting into, and I feel like each of these sessions will potentially kind of build upon each other. So once we kind of have that, these are the solutions that we're contemplating. So to achieve those certain outcomes, what are the service levels that we need to drive towards? Then in the next following sessions, how do we think about the operating costs, the capital expenditures that are required? Then getting into the more, I think, tricky discussion, number 7 there. How can we actually fund this? And then just moving into different topics as we develop and build our draft report. We'll definitely have more opportunities to kind of add more sessions as need be as we really roll into 2025. But I feel like this will give us a pretty good arc of kind of how we ultimately get there to build that final report and really come together with recommendations as a group. Couple of things that I did want to just mention, so we do have probably a dozen to maybe about even 20 requirements of what we need to put in that report. Those will be sprinkled through all of these different sessions. Things like TDA reform, we don't have a particular session that's going to just solely focus on that. That will be a conversation that different elements of that will come up through various sessions. Also something that we can think about as far as our technical working group, about how to address those to kind of bring back to this team to really have a thorough discussion on something like that. So you'll see meetings throughout the state. These first couple meetings have been really kind of brief, just have been able to scratch the surface on some of the topics, but we will be spending half-day sessions together as we move forward. So it will be a heavy time commitment, but really appreciate you all and your willingness to really dive into the material here. So with that, I do want to turn it over to Chad to talk a little bit about our, oh, sorry. Okay, did want to have Chad talk a little bit about our technical working group and how that'll be structured and how they will interact with this body here.
Thank you, Mark. So as you see on the slide here, we have the Transit Transformation Task Force, and then we have a technical working group. And where we are in that process of standing up that group is that we will be meeting for the first time here in March to prep for the next Transit Transformation Task Force session. They share the same goal of reimagining the future of transit in California. This group will support the data analysis and provide some technical expertise for for content ahead of the TTF meetings, and the comments and feedback that you provide in these sessions will guide a lot of their work in preparing for the upcoming meetings. We have both a group of people that we are working with that most of whom come from the original Transit Transformation Task Force applications. And so a lot of them are your peers in the transit field. We also have Caltrans and CARB and a couple of other entities engaged in that. But we will be adding many subject matter experts. So right now we have about 13 to 15 people that are committed to a heavy load of work, a core group that is formed, that we are about to get their first meeting going. But then we have 30 to 40 subject matter experts that we're looking for recommendations on. They cover a very wide variety of subject areas, everything from housing to procurement to workforce development to capital project related issues. And TDA reform is one of them that we specifically want expertise in, from both the transit agency world and others that you would all recommend to us. So this process of making sure we have the right support in place to do the work is something that we are working on, on a rolling basis here. Again, the subject matter experts would not need to attend every technical working group meeting, would come to the meetings where those topics are relevant. And that is a group through which in like 15 to 20 different policy areas, we could see strong support being offered to our ongoing work. And then that will help us, in between the meetings here to make sure that we're being responsive. So questions here, Kate, go ahead.
I just want to be clear that we will get information before the next meeting so that because I'd like to brief, I think Rashidi and I are both on the small operators group in the Bay Area, and I'm the chair of the small operators committee at the CTA, and it'd be nice to be able to brief people on the work that we're doing. Also, could we get a copy of this presentation
Absolutely.
today?
Yeah.
And a list of who's on the transit working group or the technical working group, sorry.
Yeah,
that's I was gonna say, all the materials from today will go out, so you will see those. In terms of the technical working group members, still working to finalize that, but absolutely can share that out with you. And then, Michael, did you have a question?
No, I think that's my original question about that. All that's been I just wanted across all those groups so that they're all aware of the in order for us to provide feedback to make sure this within
Yeah, and I think our intent is absolutely to get, materials out in advance for, folks to be able to prepare, as well as, and I'll get to it in a little bit, a little bit of a homework assignment for you all, as you, kind of build towards that next session. But I know we only have a few minutes left. I did want to kind of go out of process a little bit, and, Mike, if you could see if there are any additional public comment, anything in the chat, and or anyone who wanted to do a brief, public comment before we wrap.
We are unable to hear virtually.
All right, thank you. I got an alternate mic. No one in the public in the room has requested to make a public comment. Rachel, does anyone on Zoom have their hand raised to make a public comment from the
I don't
chat?
see any raised hands, but please feel free to raise them at this time, and I'll monitor that. I actually see one right now, and so I'll go ahead and unmute.
Great, thank you.
Adina.
Hey, this is Adina Levin with Seamless Bay Area and supporting some advocacy around transit accessibility for seniors and people with disabilities, which was mentioned earlier in this conversation. in the topic about what would need to change, that is something that would really merit some specific thought about what would need to change to make the system more accessible, as there are, an aging population, and what would it need to make our system more accessible. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Are we able to read comments in the chat as well, or?
Right now, real time, or in the from the meeting minutes?
No, if people had commented in the chat for the meeting.
Rachel,
I can go ahead and read those aloud. We have a few from Oscar. It says we need to talk about affordability and access as well. Transit is the second highest expense for working class families behind the rent. I also think fares create tense environments for riders and operators. Plus, it creates a climate of exclusion rather than inclusion. And he also says it's also one of the most impactful ways to increase rideship and decrease VMT. Focusing on reliability and wait times is great, but it's not the full picture, especially for working class people who are already transit dependent. We need a transit system that cares about everyday riders, not just weekend riders. Providing flexible operations funding so agencies can move forward on universal fareless transit. And that was all Oscar. And then we have one other comment from Jillian that says 2-hour commute, shame on us. And those are all the comments. And I don't see any other raised hands.
Thank you, Rachel.
Right, so at this point, we'll conclude the public comment, and let's go back to the room. Michael, then Carl.
So I have a question related just to the interplay of the Transit Transformation Task Force and the Technical Working Group, specifically as it relates to Transportation Development Act reform. Having been involved in 3 efforts to reform that body of law over the last decade, I know just how complicated that body of law is, and how changes made in one area may have unforeseen and disparate impacts in another. And so I suppose I would raise some concern if the process is to have the technical working group develop a set of recommendations that is as granular as changes in statute, and then to have that presented just to this task force. And so I don't know where we will land on the exact structure, and perhaps that's still to be determined, but I would just encourage that there is some level of heightened engagement from the task force over the full year, not simply through a series of 1 or 2 meetings spread across a year, just knowing how difficult that body of law is and how impactful it is to literally every agency in the state.
Yeah, I appreciate the the flag there, and I think it is something that will absolutely have this body kind of drive. But there may be some things that the technical working group will work on in the interim to help support that conversation. Let's go to Carl, then Laurel.
Yeah, I have a question on the calendar. And I apologize if I missed, if there had been an earlier version of this distributed. I missed that the April 9th date in San Diego conflicts with the American Public Transit Association's legislative conference. And I know I'll be there on that day. I'm not sure about the other transit operators. So I don't know if there's do we have a policy on alternates, or I will be in the air at the time of that meeting personally. So I'm not sure if that presents a conflict for any other transit operators on this. Yeah.
Okay,
If we're talking about conflict, also the August 29th date, that's Labor Day weekend in LA. Just wanted to, I mean, it's a Thursday, but still, LA traffic's not great with the Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not sure what opportunities we'll have to modify the schedule, but appreciate the feedback there. We don't have an alternate process, but definitely you're free to kind of provide feedback in the interim, and that we can share out with the broader group. Laurel.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if the technical advisory groups are open to the public, or what are the ways in which the public are going to be able to provide input into this meeting beyond just public comment at the technical advisory, these meetings, and what is that process going to look like?
Yeah, we'll have to, get back to you on that. I think, the initial thinking was that our, technical working group meetings would not be open to the public, but something that we can absolutely consider.
And we have also proposed that we would do workshops that could be additional meetings of this task force on specific topics that we want to get public feedback on or other kinds of things. So if that's an idea that is consistent with where the task force would like to go, we're certainly willing to take that feedback here.
All right, can we go to the next slide? So yeah, in terms of this group, I did mention that there would be a little bit of a homework assignment. A lot of this is what we discussed already today, but we do want to make sure that we get your impact or input, get your feedback. I think a lot of this will inform how we structure the subsequent meetings, as well as different things that we may want our technical working group to work on. So again, stuff that we had talked about, one, specific challenges you think are preventing, increased ridership. A lot of lively discussion there. Just a little more detail from you all would be helpful. Other goals you view as critical to the outcomes of this body, and then any additional kind of comments, feedback that you have would be helpful. We'd like all of that to come back before March 18th, so that'll give us ample time to kind of build that into the structure of our future agendas. So that gives you a little over 2+ weeks here. But definitely appreciate everyone's participation today. I think it was a really good discussion. And then let's go to the next slide here. And that just say that if there are any additional studies, things that you are working on that you think might be relevant to this group, we will try to incorporate some of that into either our technical working group discussions and or future agenda items. Please send those out to the email address there, sb125transit@calsta.ca.gov. And with that, I know we're a few minutes over, but pretty close to being on time here. Really appreciate everyone joining us today. So this will conclude our Transit Transformation Task Force. Thanks, everyone.